And Barha, has he joined yet, or? Brothers and sisters, we will be beginning shortly. For those of you who are on the live stream, we'll be beginning shortly, so please be patient with us, and we look forward to having you joining us tonight. God bless.
هدية شلون مالوخن
رابع بشي نخون
اوه جود رابع صباي لقانا مش مايتون كله اخون اختستين ودا بضاين ليتون اللي بسبرة بس هدية اختي تست قد يشوته ماطه اوكي
مسيمة
سبايلة شكله سبايلة
صبية لهي
رابع صباي have a good time blessed time بوش مشينا
مسيمة thank you رابع بشينا
مسيمة لا سبايلة استريخاي أنا أوكي شلام على آخر مر بنيامن لم ضيق على سبايلة
بارخ مرة بشينا
بشينا بطوات شلام مرة كله خون خدش مرقلي بشامن اتوالن خا أودينس هدية تازة يتشدلنك برقوالو
That's okay. That's okay. قال سبايلي كسلي Rob is قال okay is dan خينة.
Barchmar, everything is good. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. قديشوته مرأة وتليتا قاتوليقة بطريركة طيتا قدشتا وشليخيتا قاتوليقيت مدنخت آتوراي بارخمار. من جيبي هلبت ومن جيبت أخنواتي كهنة أني دينا عمان ومن جيبت بنونة وبناتي تو بركية فيكتوريا ونيوزيلند عليماتي وكل آني تشاروكينا عمان وداها خرزة دينا من مدينات بريشة همون اتلن من أطرة أوهاتهم بتنهرن وأطروات مدنخة ومن سيدني تيانا عليماتي من راب شوباني اتويرنا شريكينا عمان بداها أرخد زوم وبزي إلى لايف ستريم بالفيسبوك قابولة وخ قديشو توخن رابا بشينا بداية وخ قد رابا بليجيتن دنا يوماني من يوم تسيامي دوخن ليتن كلية من تباقياتي ومن غزوقية بتباقيتن بكو بركية بريشة ومرعيات بريشة إنا دزوتاقو بالطيبوتا رابا قورتا اتلن من نوخن اتيولوخن اها دانا اها برسد اتجميتن من بنونوخن وبناتوخن وإلى بشاريروتا خادوتا رابا قورتا كلن اتيولوخن قديا اها برسد تاوخ اموخن اتيو بارخ مار رابا بشينتن تيه
هاويتون بسي مرابا خسيوت مر بنيامن أخونا مخبا وكل كهنة بابوات مخبة كلوخن عليمات شلامت مارنيش مشيخة وم كلوخن بغداي رابا آها إلى زوم سيشن قميتا دين أنا وعدوخينا بردا مشتعلان وتقدشتتي وقبله بغداي وين قد شاروكيون أموخن بني هو بركية فيكتوريا ونيوزيلند وكل عليمان وعليمات مخبة دينا أمان اديو جوداها كسلوخن رمشل البكستاني لساطر السر وخدشة كاوترا رابا بغدايم غزيتوخن خيلت على رابا بسبارخ دويمت هاويلا فرست قد بقتا برسوبيتا جو مريتوخن برختا ان على هبس مالقت من قربة وبرسوبايت خزخلوخن
بارخ مار هاوي ترابا بسيمة وبسبارة وخل دويمت آتي بخيلت على قربة دانا
لا لا هبس مريم
بارخ مار اتلون حليمو عليماتي خكمة بقاري أختي من قمت أزخ البقاري بالطلبخ من قديشو توخن قد صاليتون خسلوتا بوريك تقاتا
خادوتا صالح لها سلوتا مارانيتا دمرنا بلشان الصبرايا أم أوضالي شمعاوة ورا روخت قدشال علمين
آمين
آوان دوشمية نثقداش ماخ تيثي ملكوثاخ نهوي صوياناخ ايكنا دوشمية أبارا هولا لخمت سنقانا يومانا وشوقلا خوبين ايكنا دابخنان شواقن الخياوين ولا تعلن النسيونا إلا قصا من بيشا مطو ذي لاخي ملكوثة وخيلة وتجبخت العالم علمين آمين
آمين بارخ مار اتلن خكمة بقارد بيشانا مريزة بيت عليمو عليماتا خنا بتسابنا بإيديه وأني بقري الدنيا بقاري
شو خالد
بارخ مار بقارة قماي إلى من خامن هدامت سيتت عليمو ليماتي كم ديتد ملبن ميقرأ ديفيد وردة بتآمل بقارة قولي شانت إنجليش فقط
Your Holiness, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and congratulations once again on your ordination.
Thank you, David. It's a joy for me personally to be with all of you.
Thank you. Our first question for tonight's session is, what were the experiences Your Holiness faced as a youth growing up in the diaspora?
Okay, so I'll start with English and then interject with Assyrian, our mother tongue, as the various questions go by. Growing up in the diaspora, I think that is the experience of most of our youth who are members of the Assyrian Church, for the simple reason that the majority of our people live in the diaspora now. So meaning North America, Canada, the US, of course, Europe, Australia, etc. So roughly about 90, maybe to 95% of the members of the church and of our Assyrian nation as a whole are living in the diaspora. So that's a very important aspect of the church that we really have to concentrate on. And I must say that growing up in the diaspora, I've seen since my youth very hopeful signs and indications that the church is quite alive. So I grew up in the public school system. Of course, I was born and raised in Chicago. And in public schools in the 80s and 90s, and I'm sure that's the case in most of the Western countries, you get to see in various things and various ways of life that many times are not necessarily in sync with the gospel. But the blessing that I had in my life was that I was raised in the church from my very early youth, which is where I learned the Shana Saprai and the Shana Tipa, our Aramaic liturgical language, the Shana Chata as well, the scriptures. So I had a leg in both worlds, if you will, growing up in the church, the teachings of the church. And that was eventually my formation for the diaconate, later on for the priesthood as well, for which I'm very thankful. And I also got to see how many of our youth who were not at the time necessarily as connected with the church also lived. But I would say it was sort of a mixed experience of both worlds. But I'm very grateful to God that I grew up in a home where my parents took me to church from very early childhood. We learned to pray and to fast at home, myself and my siblings, some of us more than others, of course, which is always the case. But we had that backbone, which was the family, which was the parents and our connectedness to the church. So I think that was what probably preserved me from the influences that one encounters in a secular setting, especially at school, whether it's elementary school, primary school, or high school. So I'm thankful to God for that. But it was definitely the church that was a great, great backbone, a great support from my very early youth. So I grew up in the Sunday school system of the church back in Chicago. And then I entered the youth association of the church in Chicago, and we were very blessed because we always had the presence of my late predecessor, His Holiness Madnacha IV of blessed memory, who was very active in visiting with the Sunday schools and with the youth association. So we would see him often, and he would interact with us. So I count that as a great, great blessing in my life personally. And also it played a great role in my formation, in my priestly formation, or what led to my priestly formation, even before I was a deacon. So I think that those elements contributed quite a bit.
Thank you very much, Your Holiness, for sharing your experience as a youth growing up in the diaspora. دزوتا رابا اتلي سورة بخيوتا أبخننجو أترواتد معروة. So thank you very much. بوقارة ريانا إلى من خامن هدمياتد سيتد أليمو ليماتد قمديتد ملبن ميوقرتا ماري شليمون قد بقرأ لقولي شانت English باكت ماري.
Thank you. With your blessings, Your Holiness. Your second question for tonight is, how is Your Holiness involved in the church as a youth?
Okay, very good. Yes, well, As I mentioned, I was a part of the church's youth association in Chicago from the late 80s, very beginning of the 90s. And so as I took on holy orders, for a few months, then I was ordained a deacon at the age of 16. And then I was made president of the Youth Association of our cathedral parish of St. George, in Chicago. And actually, but that's back in 92. And that's when I attended our first youth conference in the US. And of course, we're at 35 or 36 years of a youth conference now. Okay, sorry. So the lights have gone out temporarily, and this happens quite often. Okay. Can you see me? Okay, very good. So I was heavily involved in the Youth Association, and as president, as I mentioned, and then being the liaison between our parish priest at the time and also the Youth Association as such. I was much younger than a lot of the other youth that were part of the Youth Association. So Hadia Berzayan, and I've seen this in California in my own diocese when I was the bishop there, we have a lot of younger youth involved, which is a very good thing, and I'm thankful for that. In Abdana D, youth, I was a junior to many others who were in their 20s and even early 30s, and yet they were considered youth. They were part of the Youth Association. So now the trend has sort of flipped, and we have a younger youth attending, which is a very good thing. But I was very active in the committee, and then that continued all throughout my diaconate when I was serving as a deacon at Margivargis Parish, Chicago.
Thank you very much, Your Holiness. Baruch Ma. بقرت لي تايا إلى من ميوقرتا ننوى مروان من youth at Auckland, New Zealand. قد بقرأ لك قولي شاند English as well.
Before I start, I would like to congratulate Your Holiness on behalf of Auckland Assyrian community in New Zealand. My question, Your Holiness, is what are the benefits and importance of attending youth services at church?
Okay, well, very good. Reflecting again on my own participation in the Youth Association. So, Chicago, youth services per se that were especially catering for the youth. So those who were a part of the youth came to the regular Raz on Sunday mornings and other days. And that was, we were expected to participate and be a part of it. Or Sultan Ramsha, for example, when we had many of the older priests who are now, they have passed on, and they also helped in my own formation and other youth who were there at the time. Now we have, and of course I've experienced this as a priest when I was a parish priest in San Jose, California, then as a bishop, and I've seen this in other parishes, other dioceses in Australia. You've had this since a number of years ago, that we have services now that are more youth-friendly, if you will, in the sense that they cater to the youth groups, and particularly the English languages. So before, that was sort of frowned upon. And that was one of the things we still have that struggle, Hadia. But and that will always be an ongoing issue. But the way that the church ought to deal with it, I think, is varied, because it depends on the context. It depends on where you're living. But now you have services in the English language. And so, and that is meant to attract the youth. That is meant to be a stepping stone, if you will, in order to get our youth accustomed to the services, to the liturgy of the church, so that they can feel comfortable enough to hopefully and eventually attend the Aramaic or Assyrian language services. But the benefit is obviously the first and foremost is the ability to understand the language. And that's been a pretext for many of our youth not to attend church. Oh, we don't understand the language. We sit there, the services are too long. But we also have to remember that the service, if it's Holy Qurban or any other service, is not simply the priest and deacon doing their part and, enacting a drama. So those who are there attending also have a part in it. And I think our youth now are better equipped. We have a lot more tools than we used to engage the youth in the celebration of the Holy Qurbana and other liturgical and non-liturgical services where, for example, if we have a youth conference or we have a youth retreat, there's a prayer service, and that's catered to the youth and they're able to understand it and participate in it. So we have a lot more tools nowadays than we used to when I was growing up in the youth of the church. So the benefits and the importance of attending the services are many. Each and every member of the youth, so this isn't just something that the priests and the deacons do, and we sit there as bystanders and non-participants. So the youth have to participate actively in the Holy Liturgy and the Holy Qurbana. The youth have the obligation individually and collectively, but also individually, to accustom themselves with the liturgy of the church. So you have many, many different tools available at your fingertips to research what is the structure of the Holy Qurbana, to be able to access English language texts or any other language text of the prayers of the service, to be able to access resources of church history or of the patristic teachings of the church, the teachings of the fathers of the church. So you have that available now. And the only thing that can deter a youth, whether he or she is or is not a member of the youth association, from actually being an active participant really is only laziness. Only the lazy person will not go out and research, ask your parish priest, ask your youth minister, ask the other ministers who are working with the youth for resources. We have ample resources available. Obviously, we can do better and have more. Yes, so the church is looking into that. But we have enough now at present as we speak to actively engage the youth. So really there is no pretext. There is no mahana, as we say. So you also need to research, to look into the resources, to actively look for them, and that will engage you and so that you can be an active participant in the services of the church.
Father Khmar, thank you very much for your words, which are full of truth, Your Holiness. بقرر رواية إلى من يقرأ فرات فرانسيس من يوث ملبن بتباقر بقرر قليشانة ديما.
السلام عليكم. قمتت كذا مخوبين برخن سياميتوخ كسي قايتن قدشتا على باروخ ذو خيولو خيل عريخ بخيل الدولة.
بسيمة رابا فراتنا بنتنا على باروخ ديوتا.
بسيمة بارخ مار متمخ شختا اتثا قد يشوتوخ قاديا عظيمي وعظيماتي اتأيتا قد هاوخ أو بهرة قد ماسخ قرشخ عظيمي وعظيماتي خينة قائتا قدشتا.
بسيمة رابا فراتنا أو خبو قال رابا شابيرين سو مخشختا قميتا بتويا دخي ماسي أختي بطلابة خاليما ينبدا عليمتا ماسي قرشي العليمة خينة بجوئيتا أورخا قميتا إلى طوسة أختن يويتن لأخ عليمة إيتا يعني إما يشقي اللوخن وأمري هي Ahayana, Ahabrata ina Alaymatita, Orchet Hayutofon, Qurbayutofon Alita, Sharaktofon, Yo Khilmate, Yo liturgies of Ita, Puslet Hayutofon Achim Shichaye, Aya ila Urcha, Kameta, Edgershifon Alaymechine, Qayo Ita. Activities Umyanachine Ani in a secondary. وأني هربت هاوي هربت أوديتون إنا أرخى قمت إلى قد هاويتون توصل قد إيمان ألايمت لنا جو إيتا ين لنا أكتف جو إيتا جو سايد لاينز إنا ين بلكت شي تخجع كياتي الأمرا ين إذا يورا إذا سورا إيمان تخزي ألايمت ديان إنا تموم بيدانة مشيخة إنا بخايا مشيخاية وباخرتا إنا أكتف جو إيتا زي سبب أنا سيرنا بطولة أيضا أنا بتبخلي بدكل خانو فنطاوي بتبخلي بلاطة كل خانوفن يعني أني دينا خاضر وانوفن بالشقلي يطلانا بتوي خبان في القكولة بنونا بنات بإيتا سو أيوة تطوصة قد هاويتم example خايقة الله مخيني عين إلى أرخى بص بيقت ماسيتون جرشيتون خيالة خبراتت لين يو الله مديتا سبب قامو وهي كلها جربه يعني بيرغ يوهدها قصته كمت أمرخ خرواتا تال أمرا تال اليوث اسوسيشن تلان فلان اكتيفيتي هي بلكت اي اكتيفيتي بتجرشالو إنه أومدي تخاميلو إلى إيمان تخزي there is something special or different with the Nenashi. They're different than أومدي تخبغزايو يو جبضة تخبغزايو يو مدرسة خينة تخبغزايو الودر من أمرا بتخزي قد الله يالو بنات الدين جو إيتا are different, they're special. وبتبخلي they will, you know, they'll love the way that you live as Christians. هذا أنا بتجرشيتهم. وإن جرشيتهم وبيداء أرخا guaranteed بتباشي جو إيتا. So رابع جاين, and I know this from my own experience, يجربك قد ما يخلو يمتخ plans و strategies الله ما تخلو تودخل an activity on Monday, Tuesday, أي activity تودخلها. رابع من ديانا خينا. You know, the way we live as Christians, the way the youth live out the gospel as Christians, is the first and foremost way to attract the youth that are on the sidelines, that are not active in the church. قد أوري يوئيتو. ونورو بداية أرخى بتخامي يوئيتو. For that, I hope that helps you.
بارخ مار بسيمة رابا قديشو توخن أنا مخشخيات رابط إيمانه هدية بتقريان الميقرا إيشو غوريل من يوثد ملبن قد باقر بقارة ديو قولي شاند إنجلش باقر إيشو
بارخ مار شانا بيوخن أو بريخاس يامي دوخن رابغ ديلن بيوخن وعلى بارخلوخن
بسيمة إيشو على بارخلوخن
بسيمة مار بقارن إلى بإنجلس What is your holiness advice on keeping the zeal for our faith, tradition, heritage, and language? بسيمة مار.
Very good question. بسيمة رابع إيشو. Well, zeal يمرخلت نانا ينقيرت إيجربسا is kindled even it's put under the fire, or a fire is put under it. So let's take a look at zeal as being the fire that's in your heart and in your soul for the church, which stems from your love for Christ and for the church. You have to nourish that zeal, just like any fire that needs oxygen to keep going. If you stifle it, so zeal إلى بدامة النورة. See, so the lights have gone out again. هنا بشمايتون ده؟
We can still see you.
Okay. Okay, very good. It's just a bit dark. There we go.
Okay.
So you have to keep the fire that's in your hearts for Christ and for his church alive. and kindle it by being active in the church. Ulela manayo, only the time that you spend physically and locally at church, when you go to your local parish or your local youth group. Giobeta, you have the obligation to research the teachings of the church, the history of your church, and the obligations of Diofa. And the important thing to remember is that your role as youth of the church, obviously this is relevant and this is true for all of the youth of Ipan, is the future of the church depends on you. You have a role in the present of the church, obviously. So we don't, expect our youth only to be active for the church's future. Today, now, you have a role in the present life of the church. But what that guarantees is that the church's future will be bright and will be hopeful. So a obligation, a burden, Allah research or the aspect, the theology, the faith, the teachings of the church. Research the history of your church and try and do all of these things sort of collectively, because we don't simply want church historians. They're interested in the history of the church, and that's a beautiful thing. That's attractive, but not only the history of the church. You need to contextualize it also with the faith of the church. Why? Because that's a faith that we have to live out with the teachings of the fathers of the church. Why? Because fathers of the church are our spiritual guides. They teach us how to live out what we have read in the gospel and in the various writings of the church. So you have to enkindle that fire that's in your hearts for the church. Obviously, the clergy also play a very important role in that. Meaning, when we have a patriarch, a bishop, a priest, a deacon, a youth minister who is zealous and who is enthusiastic about the church, obviously that will rub off on the youth that he's working with. That's natural and that's to be expected. And that's a good thing. But don't only limit it to that. Obviously, our clergy are role models, spiritual role models, spiritual fathers, that's very important. But again, I want to emphasize that you also have the obligation to take that and to appropriate it, to make it your own in terms of researching the faith of the church. Youth in general, why we do this, or what the priest is saying. Well, make the effort to ask. Ask your youth minister. If he doesn't know, ask your deacon who works with you. If he doesn't know, ask your parish priest who works with you. If he doesn't know, ask your priest or your bishop. So you have all of those resources available at the youth. The church wants to equip you. Soldiers. You need to be the foot soldiers of the church. And who better than the youth, who not only because of their young age have the zeal and have the stamina and have the energy, but more importantly have the love. And so that love needs to be enkindled. It needs to be nurtured through your active participation in the life of the church.
بارخ مار هاوتن راب باسيم قدشو توخن قائن مملدا ونايا. Thank you for imparting your words of advice, encouragement, and wisdom to us to research about our church traditions and our faith and to live them out as Christians. بقارد اشتا إلى من ميوقرتا ننورتا سرمو إلى ربيتة مدرشة ليشانا أتورايا قمديتة ملبن بقارب بتهاوغو ليشان
خسيامي دوخ بخلت على هما شاق وخلمانا ومنتيتا
بس متلعبا نورتا أربعة الخلفية
بقارة إلى أخ عليما بريا وقروسا قوخدانا مخيدة أمريكا داخي خوميلا قديشي وتوخن اللي شانا ديما ومتمخشختا اطلق قاديا قد أب أخنا خامخلة آل شانا بريخا.
أو رابس بايبو قررني خامتت لشانا وجروست جولشانا جماية لشانة جمع عطورايا خامتت كل خمندي إعاتي يوبيتوتا بتايلة من بابا ومن يما your family structure جارك آوهي ماخي خيلة وإمبارت أودي لإيمان بانوتا teaching قيالي قد أوكي الودار جو مدرسة شانا نفراي نشان إنجلسي نشان خينا همزوميتون إن جو بيتا جو framework at family بيتوتا جارك لشان جانن همزمخ يشوق الاكسبيرينس الجاني قطوسا دوز يوربسن جو أمريكا إنم سبب بابي ويمي تورنتو بوش جوري وبشنة بوش من couples أمريكا بشنة ديه ين أضان ديه so ليه ورابا خينانا بالإنجليز سبب بابي إتوالي قرأتك توتا بإنجليزينا conversational ديو فتشا ليه وأخناشت هاوي يوربسن جو خاطرت English speaking أمريكا so مجبورين ما قد همزم من ولشاني معي منه وآني أخجب لشاني يعني همزم خامن ديزي أنا من سورو تبكت عمري قربا بتصرش النيوة زودة باصورة شريلي لشانتي قبقراي من كهنة ديان بتوانا جو شيكاغو فكرة مني منيخي وإيواقع شرابة يورب شدني so آخر advantage رابة يورتين وخريشة يتابع خينا السيستم تيقة مقليتها لتوقت مقريبانا بشانة خاتها وباخرتها graduate أو دخل الشانة تيقة خريشة إيوة مزمورة بلشانة تيقة in fact discourage يو ديوانا قد لقى رخوة بلشانة خاتها جو إيتها لا همزمتها إينا قريتها which actually proved many years برهادة قد إيوة خا system بلكي إيوة خدشة تيقة إينا خا system رابا منتياني وآين موود لقد بوش هاود ما جميلة يعني أمرخ situated جو لشانة تيقة جو تساوت إيتا جو تساوت تخصت خضرة إيتا so آين من roughly من شنة تطلسة باخر تبرتي من يوروسا مرخت تيمي إيها قياوة أين لم بتخارو أمتي قد أيجتين وسور أمرخ بلكي جو kindergarten closet خات ريت لا هتخا جو بيتا يهم زمن ولا شانت إنجلس ويمان خساوة بآخر توقيتي لم بتخارو أومدي I'm sure ويالي إنا I'm thankful قدر خستا سبب موتي لبآخر تقد مجد يعني أورنجو لشانة يمايا whether لشانة تيقت إيتا يعني لشانة خاتس ودايا و I think I'm okay جو لشانة تيقة وخاتا maybe So that's very important. In a bataille min awah, definitely min babo yimma. قد impart odi اليالي, impress odi اليالي أنا قايوتت ليبتت للشام. So عليه خمن دي زحمت. يعني conversational لشام سواداي لشام خاطبيا. رابع السنة لقلياكتا. So parmoyen جو Australia هرختلم جو America زي. جو كندا I'm sure ومندي جو يوروب كل قطرة يوروب إتلاشان جانو زي إيتن struggle قد يوثديان بز زودة مبلوخة إن لشانا إنجلس يعني لشانا دو قطرة هل لشانا يبنايا لشانا عطرايا إنا it's not impossible it is very possible أخشي مدري باي على effort you have to put the effort in وإيك ما يوتا أو إيك ما effort بتمتود جاو حادخ بتبلطت من وزن إن رابع effort ما تتجاوه رابع سباي بتيلبت الشاني معي باصورتا conversational إن لا قريتو كتوتا دا you'll be able to converse بشاني دي أنا أطولاي رابع سبيا so if you put in the effort you'll get the same results as the amount of effort you put in آخر دي كاناية so it's again very possible we have many examples of it Yalidian, Jo Alayme, Jo Ita, Dinawiya, Jo Diaspora, and Shanadian Rabas Bible. Achna Khamdi Rabba Tava Ide, Yatan Jo Australia Zit, Jo America Itlan, Shaman Jo Canada Itlan, Khatir Jam, Yang Jo Europe, but Itlan Umrana Dian, Khatchakesha Kula parishes Dian, Imaqri Lishana Atura on a weekly basis, Jo Diocese. كاليفورنيا طاما اتلنجو كل مرياتي ات أمريكا وأستراليا خزين عمدي. So it's very important that أوهي ميلو يالي participate ودي. And it's very possible. هيش لا تخمن خد أو زحمتي لا أنا ليل كنا على الشام. We have that mentality هي بتويا زحمت. إن رابح السماء. And this is important. قد يوفن even for those of you that in the future will be parents خد علىها. قد آمن دي متيتون لجو تخمن توفن. That from a very, very young age شاريتون أمزوم من يالوخم لشان يماي. You will do them the greatest benefit that it you do. سبب إن كل diplomas شغلخلو إن كل شغلانة بوش طاي عبيدا إنا لشانة يما لي الطخلين ليلة منايو لخ عطوراي إنا we're doing ourselves a disfavor by doing that. We're selling ourselves short in order to. So بطلب منه خنوم دي لودي.
بارخمار قديش توخن هاوت رب بسيمة أن مخشخيات الشابيرة. It's very important that we do learn our language and to keep our language and increase that zeal for our language, and to practice that at home is a very crucial part of improving our spoken Assyrian and even practicing writing Assyrian. So thank you very much, Your Holiness. قد ختمخ لأن بقارة من أليمو ليماتة بتلقاريان الميوقارتا ماريانا إيشاخ من يوث ويلينغتون نيو زيلاند قبقرة بقارة خارايا قوليشاند English. فقط ماريانا.
Barakhmar, congratulations on your ordination, Your Holiness, and it's an honor to have this time with you today. Question is, how can we remove or overcome the politics that are separating our people, youth, and churches?
And by how can we remove, do you mean the youth?
Just for, the politics that we've got, and in general, that affect our people and our youth and our churches. So the politics that are kind of becoming an umbrella or getting in between our people in general,
Okay, well, let me direct these words to the youth, specifically, but the often. I think a good rule of thumb is very simple: don't get involved in it. So and if I'm understanding your question correctly, the politics you're referring to are in general with non-church entities, let's say. The best way is to avoid it and not to be involved in it. So unfortunately, we have a lot of these issues which are present in our Assyrian nation. And we experience this everywhere in North America, in Australia, and Europe, even here in the Middle East. It's very prevalent, it's very present. But for our youth, what I would advise you is to not be involved in it, because it is a web that if you do get involved, you'll get entangled in it. And it will, in the end, it will prove to be disadvantageous. In the end, it will be disheartening and discouraging. Now, how the church as a whole and the administration of the church deals with that is a different issue. And we try to deal with it very carefully. Obviously, the church has to make statements or takes a stand in certain political or quasi-political situations and issues. But that should not affect the members of the church. It shouldn't affect the youth especially. This is something that we cannot eradicate as a whole. So, for example, I've been in my various visitations in different villages and different parts. I was in Duhok last week, and even here in Arbil, we've had a lot of members of the Assyrian political groups and some of their administration come and visit and pay their respects to the new patriarch of the church, for which I'm thankful. And I also intend to, for example, invite all of them locally, the heads of the political and national groups, Umtanai and Politikai, to have a very friendly and fraternal roundtable discussion with them, just to tell them and to demonstrate to them that, look, as the patriarch of the church, who's beginning his ministry now, I offer my prayers and my support for all that you do that will be for the benefit of our Assyrian nation as a whole, without saying that the church is politically aligned with you, Group A, or with you, Group B. So that's not the role of the church. But as a patriarch, I'd like to demonstrate my solidarity with their ultimate goal of benefiting our Assyrian nation as a whole, and to say to them, you know, we need to be united on the ultimate goal of your political movement. So the church will not be aligned with your political movement or your political group, but the church will be there to demonstrate its prayers and solidarities and blessings when you as a political group or as a national entity work tirelessly and faithfully for the benefit of our Assyrian nation. And we need to tie them together to look at the ultimate goal and to define that ultimate goal, which is we call it a zibqa, a haputa, some sort of a right for our Assyrian nation. Now they go about achieving that goal in different ways. The church obviously has its own way because the church is the most ancient entity in the Assyrian nation. The church has a moral authority that is present in the Assyrian nation, even among those who are not members of the Assyrian Church of the East. And the church is, oftentimes I refer to the church as the conscience of the nation. So regardless of who the patriarch is, who the bishop is, who the priest is, the Church of the East as a whole, with its entire amazing 2021 years of history, is really the conscience of the Assyrian nation. Why? Because you have seen and you will see the church present in the past and in the future at every momentous and pivotal point in the history of our nation for these past 2,000 years. And that's an important role. Doesn't mean that the church will dictate we ought to do this or not do this, but the church is really the conscience of the nation. So I intend on meeting with the various political groups and our Assyrian national groups here in Arbil and other places. Hopefully I'll be going to the States at the end of this month, and I'll be meeting with them most likely in Chicago, invite them for a fraternal discussion to say, look, from the experience I've had so far in visiting the various villages and some of the major centers of the church and of our Assyrian people, especially here in the KRG region, and I intend on going to Baghdad hopefully soon as well, that we as a nation need to unite on where and what we would like to see for our people in the future. That ought to unite us. Now, with regard to the churches, obviously there are divisions among the various churches in the Assyrian nation, which is unfortunate. And the unity of the church, we believe and we say, is a gift of the Holy Spirit. The church can only unite, especially with the Assyrian Church of the East and the other faction, which is the ancient Church of the East, which is the closest. Obviously, we have the Chaldeans, whose division from the Church of the East is about 5 centuries long now, so that's a bit more difficult. But we always keep hope alive and always pray that the Holy Spirit will move us to unite as a church. And I think that will be of great benefit for the nation as a whole. The unity of the church takes a different aspect, a different picture, if you will, because there are canonical issues, according to the canons of the church, that are involved. The unity of the nation is a bit more free-spirited, if you will. But I'm sure that the various political factions and the various national groups in our nation all over the world do long for and do look to the day that the churches will be united. That is something that we can work on actively because that's within the sphere of the church. But with respect to the political movements and whatnot, we intend on being there again as the conscience of the nation. So recently I visited Semele. It was last Saturday, and we had an audience with the members of the parish and the community and our Syrian people as a whole. And I spoke to them. I visited some of the graves of our martyrs last Sunday in one of the villages. And although I did not make a political statement, but I did make a nationalistic statement. And that the martyrs that our Assyrian people have given for the life of the nation, both at Semele and various other parts of the country, were buried at a village called Berijane, demonstrate that it's important for the Assyrians of today, of 2021, to be united in the end goal. And I think that's still something that we have to agree upon. What is our end goal? What would we like to see as a nation? What would we like to achieve for our Assyrian nation? So each political group has its own definition. They have their own way of working and implementing what they envision for the nation. But what is our common goal? I think we have to define that and define it clearly. And I think that's where the role of the church is, to say, look, as the oldest entity in the Assyrian nation, I would say the most revered entity of the Assyrian nation, Group A or Group B or Group C, or even collectively, you are wrong or you're correct in defining what the goal of our nation should be. So the church needs to have a part in that. Again, as I mentioned, not to dictate, but to sort of guide spiritually, to be the conscience, the collective conscience of our people, simply because we are the longest standing entity in the Assyrian nation. The Church of Peace, that's a historical fact. Anyone who's read anything about church history or the history of the Assyrian nation will logically come to that conclusion. And that is the role I hope to exercise as the patriarch of the church, and to be that glue, if you will, and that encouragement. I must say that I've seen nothing but respect and love from all of our political groups and nationalistic groups that have come to pay their respects. And so I'm thankful for that, and I intend on building on that. And I think that's how we can remedy some of the problems that we have. The unity of the church, as I mentioned, is a bit different because it has some canonical issues. It doesn't mean that they are insurmountable. They can be if the will is there and the desire is there. So, but again, we have to pray about it. But with regard to the youth, coming back to my first statement, I think it will be of a disadvantage for you and discouraging if you get entangled in the political issues. So you can be very good and productive and faithful umtanaye by loving your nation, by learning your language, by learning your history, and by being good Christians, because we need the help of God to guide our nation today.
Hautraba Basima Kadisha Tochon for your words of wisdom. Thank you very much. I'll now pass on to His Grace Mar Benjamin Elia, Episcopate Parkiet Victoria, New Zealand, to give some words.
Baruch Mar Hautum Basime, Allah Habitaile Basime, Khutamed الدنيا بوقارد بقريلون عليما وعليماته أخشيدية بطلبخ من قديشو توخن حكمة نصيحتي أبهاي أن closing address كل يعني بشماينا حكمة نصيحتي قدنا بنونا وبناتي دينا لخا وأني دينا الفيسبوك بشمايا وأني تخرطة بتشميلون الدنيا خبراني بارخ مار بداين طليبا وأخشي بلغ الصاد because I know how busy you are أخشي خبلغ الصاد خيتا قني معلن من نوخن هاوتم بسيمة
لا بخادوتا أنا دزوت رابط المطورة أحضانايتم بسيمة مليزالو. A side note, the Sydney youth were trying to actually get in yesterday.
Okay.
And you can look into that later. In the first
name, first serve.
Priority Dio.
Thank you.
Definitely. Can I close with a question? Okay, my question is, and we can maybe go around briefly. What would you like to see in the church today as the youth? مودينا إن ديانة بلكت ليتم بغزايو ين باصورة بغزايتون. In your experience of the church and in your participation in the Youth Association, what would you like to see happen, take place, occur, maybe not occur, in the life of the church today?
I think Hamzamta Machshachta, I think you can Idochen Marmituna where it says raise hand and lector Rob if you could please unmute. Ado parsupatile marume ide. Okay, well itsancha buqara min Givergis. There's no video actually Givergis. So Rob, if you could please unmute Givergis. Thank you. Oh, there you go.
Baruch Markesi. Congratulations on your Siamida. You lead us to be the best people we can. خاب قارئت لي أنا قد جيلوتي رابك أزن و صوت درمشة ورابا خدين بس خا شاتنويت إتوالي إيوا قولي شانا آتيكا إتوا خدشا شمنوا the prayers will be in the Shana Chata in the near future. I was just wondering if that's in the works or if that's gonna happen.
Yes, we have a draft of the Pushakat Raza in the Shana Chata, which was an issue that's been on the table of the Holy Synod for a few years now, actually, since the time of the late Mardanka. So we'll be looking into that in our next Synod meeting.
We have Shamasha Philip, Zoom 1.
No,
it's fine. Thank you. We appreciate it.
أخمار أسيمة رابا الدانت ديوت متقاتا خمدي رابا طيمانة لمار مار أختي بو أمدي يعني بي خزخلة جو أخيوث جو إيتا من دي قامة إلى خابصلت centralization قد أنا إديو شماشة ينهدامت إيتا ونجو ملبن لا خزن خا شخلابها ينخا أسقوتا إنه أورن خلمة رازا جو لندن ينجو دوهوك ينجو خابصلت centralization هويا وأبزي قد هر من يعني خاباوة من دوا من دي إلى هلبت من تكنولوجي من قرياني من بالخاني هماش ideas دي بتاوي technical إن تكنولوجي أورا جو إيتا قا خلمتت بني إيتا إنهاوة من خا سيستم يعني من خا من دي قد هما شيء الصورة هاوي أو يخا نتورك أختي وخا كوش متمارن إيشم شيخ روخنا إيتا هذا أبزي أو يخا بصلت نتورك قد شولانة من ديانة أو يهسناي قد بش هذه فيسبوك وخوايا مخمرت seasoned in using Facebook and promoting activities إن رابو بجزودة التن من أختي سوشيال ميديا الترابة شولانة ماسخ ودخلوا كمدرسة كنسيانة بضاين إلى الجنرال أختي أيه وتخمنتي إنه الماسخ خزخ بصلة centralization جو خلمت و introduction it IT and technology قد بش سردنا للدنيا ديا وقربنا خل الأوضة لقد أو مندي قماي بلكت يطخ كما أتوراي أتم بالدنيا سب بخشاون إديو يوما هيج خلي ما سجاوب لأول مندي أو يتم بسي مرابل دي برسل
بسي مرابل شماشة مثل أنا بخشاون جو سوشيال ميديا وآي تي دوسي خدشة بوش لقامخ حلت إيوغ جو سنتراليزيشن اتخلمت إيتا سب من دكتور بكتا إيتنش خيك من شفلاق واينا ينخيك ما فرشوني واينا أنا خينا خمن ديرا قد جارك مش السنة هذه قاية يشغل الدومتي إنا I'm encouraged to do that يوم ما أروى at least جو دياسبرا بغزاي خرابة منه تركيا مرياتا مبلوخنا social media means بريشة technological IT means شان خدري خيشة لقا مبداين إطلابة شولها لقا وادا but centralize أو دخلوا خينا قهدية we have centralization at a diocesan level يرابه تركيا إيمان كل هاويلو كله تركيا هاويلو أتخم صيات أيضا تماسك أصرخ وقتاوي أمر خامن دي هدية نصير بقلة فاطرة كيتا ين at least كله تركيا share أوديا موضوع إنا إطراز خدمة البقرخ عين خينا that's a work in progress خير على قضاتي مش بالتلخ الخلق
بارك مراوتن بسيمة. Any other questions? نخشان بقارة
or suggestions? Are there any suggestions? Yeah.
There's a name Myrna Zaya. Like the Rob, if you, yeah, thank you.
سلامت مارن هوا من نوخون قالي صبيلة.
صبيلة, thank you.
أنا يوان ميرنا آلك من دوهوك دارين شلام القديشو توخون مرآوة.
الله بشير أمرنا.
باقت منا بش ما يخي خدية.
كسي أنا يوان رابق ديوانا بيوخت شركوان قسيامي دوغن هل عطا قصة بارتوخن مديت الدوغ. أنا أختي توالي خاتخ منتا بتيوث ديان بريشايث أن يودين تلا قرية لشان السوريانة قدوهوك دكان بريشة خينا دقو أطرا تخمونون إنه أي قريانة آني إلى هازر بتباش بيشة وإذا investment قدو قريانة قتاوي هازر شركي بشرابة قو activities تعيتا إنقو youth إنقو قو رازي قو ساعات تعيتا أو هاي وأنضي تخمنت دي بالضبط بين مقروان وعلى كسي
بس مجانا لا بس مجانا بس
Listen to Myrna, we've got Mariana Ishak.
Me again. I'm actually passing on this question from someone who's asked me to ask, so I'm taking the opportunity. Is there a thought to organize a worldwide youth conference or something along those lines to more centralize our youth in a way?
Yes, Praduta, Mariana. Actually, yes, there is. We had a decision in the Synod of 2019, 2020, Batawi Walanka International Youth Conference, Unfortunately, because of the pandemic that's been put on hold, we're planning at 2022 or 3. The Bishop in London Mutuk as the patriarchal coordinator youth affairs at ITA. So Awan Bitpalich do project Daud coordinate من auxiliary دي لخا مفسوت مرابرز قد لخا بدو دخلا وتعويلا جربة قد كود شيتا شوك من youth conference قد تعويلا يو أطرا أي بخر تجيب نشيب همز مخلدا بين diocese دي أنتينا كيو diaspora at least شيتا خاجعي جربي إن جارك space أو دخلوا قد تعويلو خا pilgrimage لخا عطرة so meaning قد آتي various مقامات لغيره شخنيات قديشة قد آتي سخبري قطوسة إن خا أربخ هل خمسة dioceses هاوينا شيتاي وشو لأوديله constantly بتهاوينا visits بتهاي من ما أروى الودر من أطرا قد آتي لخا وبين آخر من دي زهاوي قد يو دان باتريكوتي فالخنالو إلى قد يصورة هاوينا لخا يو أطرا من جالوتا من دياسبورا سبب آمن دي رابع أنا قايلة وبي خيالو بنات دين دين جالوسا يو western countries قد هاويلو أو يصورة رابع قربة لخا من أطرا سو أين خالن دي لفلخن خير طالبنا بسكوكا قد مليزي ليو مرياتين هاويلو شيتا خاجاي إن لا كتريشنا خاجاي definitely هاويلو تيات لخاو بتسغبري مطواتي I would love for our youth قد أزي بيشي يو مطواتي لا أزي الهوتيلز بدايت هاويلو خا experience تخينا جديا خينا ورابا منها هلا بخاينا بدوبس obviously there are more amenities at يوما إنا خشتا بيشتا يو هوتيل خجا قال الله يملي يبالو a full experience of أطرا إنا قد أزيتون قد توصل كل الله ما ينترى الله ما يخبئت بيشي بخشب بخكمة يوماني I think it will be a beautiful experience. إنا بايخ بابا لزوتا قد فينا شعر plan order strategically قد هاوي للمريات هما شعاتي سغبري لخيق وطرا
Baruch Marautum Basima, and we're looking forward to those visits. I was there not long ago, actually, Mukhnilan already, the Zuta. Itlan Kasha Morris, and then Itlan Joseph Howell.
بسيمة قاشا على بارك لفت
بارك ما تسيتوكم خابو قالت هي من خابر جانا الفيسبوك وقول لما if we have plans to have monasteries and monks.
Well, بسيمة قاشا thank you. هم من أين كليتلا vocations. So it's not build a monastery and then wait for the monks to come. You have to have the monks coming first and then you build a monastery. أخني جوربان لندزايجتينو أبسكوب على جو كاليفورنيا إتوانا تريشر واي إنا قبض أبالوتا لخش للقامة أخذ بيخوا إنا أين كليتلا الفوكيشن تتهاوي جو الله يمتيان يعني جو ناشتيان in general أخنا جو the complex الفترة خانا خزي ولا خزي مرة الدنيا من إتلان خمن buildings at master planning لقد هاوي لمدرسة الكهري. So I first step إلى قد هاوي لنخا مدرسة الكهري في seminary صرت بالفترة خانا قد أين بلكي لا أخشي قاشة وكرت على بسكوبة إذن possibly ربانة هاوي لنقد بلطي من طعمين أين هو برزرة seed الدومين دي. So that's our first step. That's I need a جو نقشة قحدية.
Baruch Marautum Basima, Itlan Mayor with us, Mayor of Hume, Joseph Howell, pardon.
بارخ مار قد يشوتوخم بنشاقة من يمينوخن وبطلابة كل من تيتا قدا قيغلو مشتاق لانوتا.
بسيمة يوسف على بارخ لخوب شو بديو خخ مير تيوم هو يبرختا.
بارخ مار هاوتن بسيمة قد يشوتوخن بلكت بقاري بقرنا بليشانة إنجليشايت بلكت هو هاي رنطقة خينة دينا أمان. Your Holiness, I think the fact that you have asked us for our reflections and suggestions already reflects the new spirit that's in the church, and we thank you very much for doing that. You spoke in response to a previous question about the availability of resources, and something as a young person that I've struggled with in the church, but that I would say dozens of other young people have said to me over many, many years, is that there isn't a single repository for the many resources that exist in our church. Yes, we can find numerous theological, Christological, biblical reflections and texts going back, even in translation from Syriac, many, many years, even going back 100 or 150 years ago, that are published by foreign missionaries and others. But there are also texts like the Khudra, for which there isn't a readily available and accessible English translation that can easily be purchased, and many other wonderful texts that give us the light of our ancient faith. Is there any plans to in a systematic way, publish these texts and make them available and accessible in a single source and repository.
Thank you, Yosef Basima. I think you're very correct. ويتا لهمزمت قد جرب خابيلا خا portal قد كل أن resources جمع طامع. We need to have people to work on that. Maybe I'll throw that in Marvin Yaman's lap. قد بالغ الله إينا. I agree. قد أنا نقيت لا ومن إينا. Well, Khudra specifically, I know there is a revision of the Khudra that was in the works a few years ago. So we have to take that up. Hopefully in the next Senat Khazakh. Resources that are already available. مصر جمخلو كله جو اختمارك يو خبورو يو خدو كتهاوي قد بوش هستناي هاوي قا access. I think that's a very good idea. شغل زد يا مالبنيان.
Thank you. Joseph أدخين عليه بقارة.
Joseph Arshan, that's it. We'll mute you now for the rest of it.
No, thank you. بارخ مار قادوتا بلخ خلو. اتن بقارة بتاعي من روبرت. قارو يا روبرت خلانيشو. روب.
بارخ مار قريشو ثوخن.
رابع بشينا ما بنتخذ.
Good, thank you. Mine's a sort of, you asked for feedback, so mine's sort of feedback rather than a question. Yeah. And just to put a different perspective on things, I serve in an English parish. I came to church, I reconnected with the church through an English ministry. And since then, I've been working on translating and trying to fulfill the service of the church in the English language. But on that journey, what I'm discovering is that there's always this desire to be as true to the original faith as possible. It's not possible with English. It's not going to be possible with either modern Assyrian. We have truly a blessing, which is the Aramaic language. And my concern is that we actually, like me first being in English, we're on this journey sort of in order to understand or like your raza, and we're changing it. But you said that laziness was one of the problems of the church, and I feel as though maybe it's a part of laziness that I'm not saying we shouldn't translate because it has its place, but there's also not to forget the actual Aramaic, and there has to be, whether it's from the young kids now, like the kindergartens and the younger ones, they start learning in the Aramaic to do the raza and to have that language, because there's nothing like it. Like you can translate in English or modern, but to have it in the Aramaic, and to be able to understand it, there's nothing like that. So my concern is that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And so I'm just hoping that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Rob. I don't think it will happen. I mean, obviously, the hierarchy will not allow that to happen. The trick is, how do you find a healthy balance? Now, as I mentioned earlier, so I grew up in my formation in the church immediately with Lishana Tikha, with Aramaic. Not that the priests didn't know Lishana Chata, but because they were trained in the old system where Lishana Chata was used as a medium to explain more, maybe for the reading of the gospel, obviously, and Qaryani and Shlicha during the Raza. But when you get into the Mazmura and Khudra and some of the patristic writings, it wasn't, you'd have to read it in Aramaic, understand it, and be able to translate it into modern Assyrian in order to demonstrate that you know what it means. And that's the system I grew up with, that I was trained with. So Lishana Tikha Qadiyu Qaraba Khinat Tlanguita is second nature. The problem is when you have faithful who are there, and as I did mention laziness, and it sort of goes both ways. I mean, the church also has to help the parishioner, the faithful, in that journey. Obviously, we will never leave the Aramaic language, because I believe one of the greatest, if not the greatest treasure that we have as the Assyrian Church of the East in our possession till this very day is the fact that we celebrate our liturgies and the language of our Lord and his disciples. And no matter where you're at and what context you're in, you mention that to people, especially foreigners. They're floored by the fact. I remember once there was the filming of a series that was on National Geographic. It's called The Story of God. I believe it's archived. And you've heard of Morgan Freeman, I'm sure. He was the one who was introducing and doing the various interviews. So I had an interview with him in Arizona for a clip that they were doing on Christians, and there was an Assyrian family that had fled because of ISIS. So they had asked me to be a part of it. And when I mentioned to him that our church still celebrates the liturgy in the language of Christ in Aramaic, he was amazed by it. Now, I don't know what his faith background is, but he was just so taken aback by it. And I gave him a cross that we have made in the States that was modeled on the Nestorian monument cross. And I gave it to him, and he was very, very thankful. And this is someone who's he's in Hollywood, and he's genuinely involved with other things that are important, such as faith, such as the story of peoples, things of that nature. But he really, really appreciated the fact, and there's so many others. So we do have to build on that. We have to preserve that. That's why I believe that the seminary system, God willing, and Nisibis also, there's the Syriac courses that will be coming along gradually. So these are ways that the church can help preserve and promote the Aramaic language. And we really need to do that, because that is one of the greatest treasures we have.
Any other questions or recommendations, suggestions that I'm sure itten raba أختي مبيونة خينا خيك ما بن خابين البقري بعرف مرموت خبرانة خرايط اتلوخن قديا
أيتم بسيمة رابا فسيوت مر بنيامن كهنة فيلو أمان Shamashe, all of you beloved youth, I thank you for this time. Again, it was a great joy for me to be with you. And you're actually the first youth group I'm meeting after my consecration. So just keep that in mind. Don't tell this to me. Ina Raba and those that offered their recommendations and what they'd like to see. Again, the church this is your church. We are here to serve the faithful. We're here to serve you spiritually. So, to remember that you are an integral part of the church. And without you, without all the faithful as a whole, there is no church. Because the church is not simply the clergy. It's the flock of Christ that is shepherded by the clergy, whom Christ has placed there in his stead, in his name, to feed you spiritually. So, that's a bit specific, but it needs to be, because we are a distinct people, a distinct nation, a distinct church with a very unique and special history. So please, the church is brought to you by you. You have an important role to play, and you need to realize that, and you have to implement it and put it into action. Again, it was a great joy. I thank His Grace Mar Binyamin for arranging this youth meet via Zoom. I really look forward to the day in person in Australia, God willing, when your lockdown is lifted. Maybe if you have a few more protests, you can get it going. So, Joseph, you didn't hear that, huh? Shut out that. But Allah Barak Lofan, I know just by the fact that you're here, that you're present, you have a great faith and love for your church. So that is a great beginning point. That's a great foundation. Please build on it and increase it. Allah Barak Lofan Kulofan. And again, it was a great joy for me personally to be with you.
بارخ مرايتم بسيمة قداها دانوخن بداين اتفاقياتنا بارتفاقياتي أخشيت ودلوخناها دانا.
Yeah, there's actually someone waiting downstairs. So.
بداين على هاي الروخن قبل طيبوتا ربطة من جيبي ومن جيبت كهنة دينا عمان لخا حكمة بغزاين قاشة أنطواني لي قاشة توما كاكلو قاشة موريس ومون قاشة خينة باروجانا الفيسبوك شماشة وكل بنونة وبنات طيثا قدشتا بارخ مار بن شاقي وخم يمينوخن وهابيتن رابا باسيميل داها اتفقتا وداها دانا طيمنتا اتمورالوخن عن بنونوخن وبناتوخن
هابيتن بسيم أخذ المر بن يامن قمر يستو مجد خادو تجورته وقدي وخلت على بدر تعوين الاتخبر سبب
بارخ مار هابيتن بسيمة كلوخن هابيتن بسيمة دويلوخن عمن علىها بارخ لوخن علىها منت منوخن وبصالخ مريا علىها آها مرة آور وبتخي أرخاتي مدري قد خزخلون قد يشوتي من قربة وكلوخن خزخلوخن مدري أمراني وجمخ من جيبة زوم جمخ فيس تو فيس باتا المريا بسمعني بارخ مرة من شاقم يمينوخن كلوخن هايتن رابا بسيمة
هايتم بس مختوم مر بنيامن وبطلب المدرسة صلوات كلكم قدي as I embark upon this apostolic ministry for the greater good at Eitan Qadishta قبلونا بنات إيتا and I also impart my blessing قيكول خامنوخن على هبارخ لوخن وناطروخن خامنوخن خدي السلامات هذا خير على خزخلوخن فرصة بايت
بارخ مع رايتم بسيمة
بسيمة رابا خوش مشي